Welcome back, everyone. We'll begin by inviting Tejo to chant for opening the sutra.
The Dharma is deep and lovely. We now have a chance to see it, study it, and practice it. I vow to realize its true meaning.
And now we'll reading of the Dana statement.
In Buddhism, when practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana are to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings of Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. And you can do this directly to Great Tree. And I'll put a link to the online donation page as well as the physical address for physical dana offerings.
Thank you. This morning's speaker will be Reverend Tejo Munnich. She is a disciple and Dharma heir of Dainen Katagiri Roshi and studied with him from 1975 until his death in 1990. Reverend Munich was ordained a Zen priest in 1981. And in 1983 already, she began to envision a residential practice center and community with, at its heart, Zen residential practice for women. This came to be Great Tree Zen Women's Temple, incorporated in 2004. After an exacting search for the right location, the present location in Alexander, North Carolina, was found, and Great Tree opened her doors in 2005. In addition to developing Great Tree, Reverend Munich is Dharma teacher for the Zen Center of Asheville and also Charlotte Zen Meditation Society in Charlotte, North Carolina. Last year, Tejo celebrated her 40th anniversary of ordination, which means she has already spent over 40 years teaching and giving service to the Zen community. We thank you so much, Tejo, for giving us the opportunity to practice together, and look forward to hearing your talk this morning.
Thank you very much. I think you've added a few things to my bio.
A little time has passed and your anniversary has happened. A few things.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that for a long time, so yeah, I'm surprised. So I designated this year as the year of the Sangha. And the reason that I did it was because, well, first of all, I had seen a quote on Facebook that was attributed to Thich Nhat Hanh, which said, "The next Buddha is Sangha." And there was something that awakened in me. I hadn't really heard him say anything about it, or I don't remember anything, but somehow it awakened something in me, and I think that it awakened something in me because as I thought about this talk, I started thinking about all of the sanghas that I have been a part of. You know, when Daiga Kurume spoke, he talked about all of the various sanghas he had been a part of. And for me, I go back very much to the Catholic Church that I was raised in. I can see it in my mind. It was there was a school and a church and a rectory where the priests lived and a convent where the nuns lived and a playground for us. And it was all, I don't know, I was trying to think this morning about how big it was, maybe a square block or more. Probably must have been more because our church was pretty big. But the thing that, the reason it comes to mind for me is because it was such a community of people that came together for the purpose of spiritual practice. In Catholic schools, of course, everything was taught from the perspective of spirituality and Catholicism, history, geography, everything was presented in that way. But all of the kids that I was in school with also went to the same church, and all of our families knew each other, and it was a very much of an extended community, and almost like a cocoon, or someplace where we were all growing together, and as a child, probably preparing me to bloom as an adult, which I guess is the function of school. So that was the first one that always comes to mind for me because it's a really extended community. One day, Katagiri Roshi said to me, though, that family is community. Our family is Sangha. And in thinking about that, I was thinking about how within a family, we work together. In the case of my family, we prayed together. We went to church together. We lived together. We ate together. We did everything together. We worked together. And what Dogen Zenji talks about when he talks about training in the monastery are three elements. One is, of course, sitting together, zazen. Another is studying together, which includes Dharma talks and personal interviews called Dokusan, and working together. And I've tried to include all of these elements in Great Tree, and I always feel so happy when we work together, for example, or when we sit together for sesshin or for some kind of retreat. Just that intentionality that we all have to to work together to encourage each other to be our best selves. Sometimes I feel when I first started teaching at the Zen Center of Asheville, I kept wondering kind of what my job was, because I didn't really feel like lecturing was my thing. And I didn't feel like I was a strong enough person to hold a community together or even attract a community. I was kind of at odds, and yet at the same time, people were coming and people were sitting, and we were working together and we were studying together. And finally, I realized that my function was just to stay there, just hold down the fort. And in thinking about that, I think that, it isn't so much what I am or what anyone is, but what our, first of all, are placing ourselves into a spiritual practice. It encourages and inspires others. But the interesting thing about that aspiration or that inspiration is that it doesn't necessarily reflect the person who is inspiring. And by that I mean it doesn't reflect what I am, but what each person that may be inspired by my practice or by my intention or by my presence, it elicits from each person that comes to Great Tree or who came to Zen Center of Asheville. It elicits that it awakens in that person their own aspiration to practice. And we all kind of come to this with a different need, with a different maybe intention, a different thing that we have to work on, that we feel we have to work on, or that we know we have to work on. And so when I went to Minnesota Zen Center, for example, I imagined that Katagiri Roshi was a particular perfect person, perfect according to my definition. But what all that really told me, or all that, I didn't realize it, but all it was really telling me was what I was aspiring to. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is that we are all each other's teachers, even in just by showing up. There was a friend of mine who went to a talk or went to a retreat with Sherry Huber one time, and he was so inspired by her. Sherry is very charismatic, and he was so inspired by her that he went to talk to her and said, "I want you to be my teacher." And she said, "Okay." And he said, "What should I do?" And she said, "Show up." And really, in a sense, showing up is the teaching. It's not the person who's speaking or who's leading, so-called leading. It's that person is just the person that's kind of holding down the fort. But it's all of us being inspired by each other. I often tell the story about my friend Kathy when we were at Tassajara. I didn't know her very well, but I knew her through Zazen mostly. That's how because we didn't talk a lot at Tassajara. We were working or studying or sitting and one time during a sesshin, it was obvious that she had a very bad cold, or that she was very sick with something. And I remember noting that she just showed up, even she wasn't feeling very well, and was very, and I was very affected by that she wasn't, you didn't feel any resistance from her. You felt just this commitment to practice, and she just showed up. When it was time to show up for Zazen, she just showed up. And I'm not saying that I think people should, push themselves through illness, but I think that it's so easy to use any excuse to not show up. And I was saying the other day, I remember when I was first sitting, and maybe one of my first sessions, I thought often, what am I doing here? This is just such a waste of time. I have so much to do. Why am I sitting here and facing a wall? And I think that's often at the, first of all, that's an indication of resistance to me, but also it's coming from that place of fear of what might come up or something like that. We don't realize it, but that's where it's coming from. So for me, Sangha is showing up. It's showing up and practicing together. And Galen was talking a couple weeks ago about online Sangha. And most of you probably are aware of the fact that I resisted it very much until the pandemic happened. And, I knew that that was the choice that I had, and have found it to be very beneficial in so many ways. And one of the big ways is that it gives us the opportunity to come together from such distances. I look around and see that many of you are from out of town, out of state, or, at a distance from Great Tree, that it's not easy to get here. And so, and I also, another thing that I'm noticing, and especially from bringing in some of my friends that live all over the country to give talks, I notice how we're starting to have inter-Sangha sharing and inter-tradition sharing. I recognized at one point when I first moved out here, and I wasn't specifically connected with Minnesota Zen Center anymore, I noticed how, and as I'd meet students who had practiced in other, not just other Sanghas, but with other teachers, I noticed my mind kind of comparing the way that they were taught with the way that I was taught, the things that my teacher said with things that their teacher said, or just the spirit that they brought to it, and having this sense that, my teacher was the best teacher, and he knew, and even little things, little details, I would think, that person hasn't got it right. And one day realizing that this was ridiculous, that somehow, just because I really didn't have the experience of these other teachers and these other Sanghas, at that point I really hadn't had a lot of exposure to other Sanghas in the country or other teachers in the country, that somehow I had gotten very closed in really what shouldn't be a closed system, and not only not recognizing, but judging. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that we were very busy just trying to pay our mortgage, just trying to make the Sangha work and develop and learn from Katagiri Roshi. And none of us knew really much about what we were doing. And I think that all of the Sanghas that were developing in this country were developing in that way. We had Japanese teachers and we were Americans, and there was the cultural misunderstandings and differences that came up. And so we were busy just in our own little world trying to make sense of what it was that we were doing. And so we got very attached to our own way of doing things and to our own teacher. Thich Nhat Hanh says, that you get attached to your place of sitting. But it's really more than that. You get attached to kind of your way of doing things. And when I went to see my teacher after doing the final ceremony of Zuisei in Japan, when I went to see my Japanese teacher, Katagiri Roshi had already died by the time I went to see him. And he said, congratulations on your Dharma transmission and on finishing your Zuisei. And he said, now you should do things your way. He was talking to a few of us, a few of Katagiri Roshi's students that were there at that time. Now he says, you should do things your way. Don't try to do things the way that your teacher did them. You should let the Dharma show itself in your own expression. And that's the kind of differences that we'll see between Sanghas, is that every teacher has their own personality, their own experiences, their own karmic stuff, and ultimately their own style. And Katagiri Roshi had his own very Dogen-esque style. He was very strong Dogen adherent, to the point where he told us that even in Eiheiji, when he was practicing at Eiheiji monastery, he was laughed at because of some of the things that he did that Dogen had said you should do. And so that was his style, you know. And Maizumi Roshi, who also grew in Sangha, who practiced at the same time, his style was quite different. Maizumi Roshi grew up in a temple. His father was a temple priest. So he had a very expansive knowledge of ceremonies and the meaning. I learned a lot from Maizumi Roshi, that Katagiri Roshi, either he didn't know it or he somehow never mentioned it. So, you know, there's these different styles, but these different things that we can learn. Katagiri Roshi, to me, he was very much of an introvert. It was hard for him to talk, to give a talk. When he first started talking, his hands would be in this mudra, but they would be shaking. I noticed it every time when he started talking. When he would get into his talk, and it would kind of flow and be easy to understand and hear. But he would always start out shaking. I mean, he was speaking in a language that was not his first language. And why was I saying that? Oh, but well, anyway, I don't remember why I mentioned that. But you know, we can learn from each other. We can learn from other sanghas. And what I started out saying is that this is one of the things that that this online Zoom offers us the opportunity to do, is to recognize and appreciate what various sanghas and various traditions have to offer. And also it allows us to get to know each other. Surprisingly, many of the people that came to Great Tree came for different events and different times, so they never got to know each other. And now we have times when we're all coming together and getting to meet each other, and you know, try out different things and things like that. But anyway, what I found out when I looked more into this quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, which was quoted, like I say, by, I guess, one of his students on Facebook. The next Buddha is Sangha. I love that idea that we as a Sangha, as a practicing community, spiritual community, that we embrace the spirit of Buddha together to create a big Buddha. But actually, that I found that was not what Thich Nhat Hanh said, or at least that's not what I could find. I could find anywhere on the internet. What he actually said is, the next Buddha may be Sangha. And so he was suggesting, there's a short article in Inquiring Mind by him talking about this. And just a second, my mail is coming in. That dinging you hear is my mail coming in. What he was trying to do is to encourage us to see ourselves in that way, I think. He talks in this article about metta, about the practice of loving kindness, and saying that if many people can cultivate this kind of loving kindness, for not just for each other. If you read the Metta Sutra, it starts, some versions of the Metta Sutra start with the self, saying I love myself, saying I wish myself peace and joy and happiness and health. And then it moves on to those people that are close to us, our good friends, our family, people that we feel a connection to, people that we somehow have learned to love despite our differences. And then we move out to those people that we don't have such a strong connection with, but extending it out and out and out, extending it out to people that we don't know, extending it out to our enemies, people that we don't like, people that we don't agree with. And that's the spirit of metta. And if metta were truly, if we were truly able, even as a small seed community, if we were really able to fully practice metta, then I think metta, if you've done any Tonglen, we have Tonglen here on Thursday mornings. If you've done any Tonglen, you understand the ability to recognize in yourself something that you might be doing that might create some kind of disharmony in the community or disharmony with others in your life. And that Tonglen practice is very, it's a way to cultivate compassion, which in Buddhism, compassion is not to feel bad for someone else, to feel sorry for someone else, but to be, it's more empathy, it's more recognizing that sadness or that what that other person is feeling that's causing them to be acting in a certain way because we've experienced something like that. We can touch that experience. So Thich Nhat Hanh talks about cultivating this metta in whatever way we can. And the reason I brought up Tonglen, and also we've been meeting starting in January, we've been meeting on the full moon on Zoom and cultivating that compassion and recognition, that awareness in ourselves, and recognizing what it is and mentioning even what it is that we want to set aside, what we want to and not be doing, because we recognize that it creates disharmony in our lives and in our interactions. This is a very different sense of community than I experienced in Catholicism, and that I experience in the world in which we live. And I say that because I feel like this metta practice, or this practice of Tonglen, or setting aside, these practices are practices of awareness and recognition, and not practices of judgment. Judgment comes first, and we can easily get caught in that judgment without even realizing that we're doing it. It's so easy, it's so quick. It happens so quickly that we don't even notice that we're judging. And we're already full into criticizing and kind of really disconnecting from others, rather than finding that connection. I think one of the reasons I wanted to ask the question this year, what is Sangha? And some of the speakers who have spoken on Saturdays have addressed this. I put it out to all the speakers, but not all of them. Other ones have other things they want to talk about, so that's fine. But is because I realized that this has been kind of a thread in my own life. It's been an underlying search or question in my own life of how to live and learn in community, how to awaken through community, through Sangha. And for some reason, this is not very much spoken of in the Zen world in which I function. And I think it's probably, it needs a lot more attention. If we put our attention to this question, what is Sangha? I think it causes us to reflect on what is our relationship to others, and what is the function of others in our life. What do we contribute to others' lives, and what do others contribute to our lives? And I was listening also to a talk by Thich Nhat Hanh about Sangha, and he was even extending it beyond human. Kind of what Dogen says about when we let go in Zazen, we experience the Jijiyu Zamai, the giving and receiving of life. We experience that fully, and the grasses and trees and walls and fences all begin to expound the Dharma. And Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this. He walks over to the flower during this talk and touches the flower, and talks about how the flower teaches us, and how the flower is part of our Sangha. And to recognize what Dogen is saying, and hear what Thich Nhat Hanh is trying to point to, helps us to see, to touch that world, touch the world, touch life, really, not just the world, life, in the way of truth, in the way of true reality. We were talking the other day in the study group about absolute and relative reality. And relative reality really represents the kind of discrimination that we have to do in order to function in life. We have to make some choices. You know, in Zen, you hear, when it's time to eat, just eat. When it's time to sit, just sit. When it's time to do what it's time to do that. You know, but and that expression helps us to just enter into life without having to give it a lot of thought in each time that we act, each thing that we do. I experimented with this after I stopped practicing Catholicism. I kind of got myself to the point where I could be completely off schedule. I was working a minimal amount of just kind of, you know, being a hippie, I guess. And I got to a point where I hated having to decide, go through that whole process of deciding what I was going to do next. And that was about the point when I met Katagiri Roshi and embraced Zen practice and started to create some kind of a structure in my life. So, because sitting down and thinking about it and trying to figure out what I'm going to do at each moment was just, it gave me a headache. So I think that on the one hand, we may easily get kind of compulsive through structure and driven and forget to let go and just let our minds not determine everything, every action. And when we do that, and Zazen really gives us the opportunity to do that again and again and again. Of course, our mind keeps working, but every time that we do that, we get this experience of absolute reality, which is everythingness, or as it's called in Buddhism, shunyata. It's sometimes translated as emptiness. This emptiness means that there is nothing. Everything is empty of its own inherent existence, that everything exists together. That's why I call it everythingness. Or vastness. Vastness, I think, is also another word, something that takes us out of our own head, our own definition. I don't like to use the word world because world creates definition, or even cosmos. Everything we can define in our brains when we use words. So Sangha, I think, is this recognition of that interconnectedness, and also the constantly changing nature of reality. The interconnectedness and the ever-changingness are working together. And so we are being affected by everything that's changing all the time. And we are affecting everything by our actions, by our movement. That's a big responsibility. Dogen Zenji points to the precepts and says, if you awaken to interconnection or interdependence, or the interconnection that we live within, interbeing, Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing, and the impermanent nature of life, you will keep the precepts. That's how to keep the precepts. But that's a big order, you know. First, we have to kind of get to that point. But that's the direction we're looking. We're not, to cultivate Sangha, we have to recognize how our mind discriminates, recognize how we judge others, recognize how we judge ourselves, recognize how we look at life from a certain perspective and recognize that it's possible to see life outside of our own perspective, which we've created. Noticing that we've created that way of seeing life, and that we can see things in life differently. And Zazen helps us to do that. And the teachings of Buddhism, which are called the Dharma, point to that. They point to the truth. But I think Sangha is the real proof. The proof is in the pudding, I guess. You know? It's the real practice. It's the real place where we can really see if what we've awakened to and what we understand is actually working in our lives. Katagiri Roshi always said, the purpose of our practice is to learn to live in peace and harmony with all beings. And you know, how do we do this? So there's these different ways of working together. Thich Nhat Hanh mentions several in this talk that I was listening to. Let's see. Oh no! Oh, it was actually it's in his book about Sangha. He wrote a book about Sangha. He says, just a second. He mentions various ways that we can. I can't find it right now. Oh yeah, here it is. That we can practice when we're living in community. Practice with each other in order to live in harmony, to create harmony in the community. And one of them is this practice of beginning anew, which is based on, and a lot of these are based on early practices which Buddha did in his community. Beginning anew is a way of on the full moon, speaking to the community in which you're a part of, and especially if you're living in community or family or living with other people, and getting together and acknowledging the things that you know that you've done that have created disharmony in the community, and with the intention to work on it and try and change that way of acting. So that's kind of the spirit of beginning anew. I think that's the spirit of Tonglen too. Tonglen is a Tibetan Buddhist practice. He said, just a second. Many practices, such as shining light, beginning anew, the role of the abbess, the mentor system, the day of living together, a spiritual family. He mentions all these different things, 7 methods of resolving conflicts. And he talks about each one of these in his book. And I think, you know, things like, he says the role of the abbot or abbess, the mentor system. All of these practices, first of all, they require that we commit to doing them regularly, looking at ourselves and saying, how can I change my attitude, change my way of thinking, so that I can recognize when I'm being judgmental before it takes on a life of its own and starts to become a criticism, and eventually a source of separation from others, a source of not recognizing that relationship that we have with other beings. But it's very difficult even with these practices, to do this in a community, even if you're doing, and in all Buddhist monasteries, I think they do a full moon, some form of full moon ceremony. I know we did it in our monastery in Japan, and also they do it at Tassajara each month on the full moon. And but I think just doing it as a form or as a ritual, which is kind of what has happened, at least in the Soto Zen tradition, can help, can cause us to not really recognize. It was a long time before I even recognized what the ceremony was about. I did it for a long time before I even understood what it was pointing to. So I think when Buddha started this ceremony, what he was trying to do was to get the community to talk to each other about any problems or difficulties that they were having. And Thich Nhat Hanh even takes it in his community to the point of having individuals sit down and go through a process of talking to each other when they have a specific conflict. But even with all of that, it's still hard to live in community. And, you know, I think in many traditions of Buddhism, they talk about Sangha as like potatoes that are being washed. You put them all in a bucket and put in a little water and roll them around, and they all wash each other. And I remember the first time that I ever heard that image, that visual, I immediately thought about how, you know, many of us in Minnesota were doing sesshin together every month, and how, you know, we were always kind of knocking heads. And, you know, I was always getting mad at people for something, you know, and in my head, wasn't saying it, but showing it, and they could feel it. And, you know, a lot of my karmic habits that I didn't even realize that I had. And when I recognized them, you know, people would kind of freeze me out. I would kind of think, something's going on here, you know. And then in Zazen, then I would say, oh, I see what they're all sort of freezing me out for, because they're annoyed about this, you know, and I'd figure it out. And then I'd be so embarrassed, I'd want to leave. But if I stayed, I always stayed because I was too embarrassed to leave. But I'd stay, and it was as if, you know, this chunk of belief system would sort of get knocked off of me in that process. So I think even if we don't do it with a lot of intentionality, it's not necessarily the ceremony itself as it is what we elicit in ourselves. And it's a constant process of doing that. And of course, probably the best way to really learn how to do that is to spend some time living in a community that has the intention of becoming better human beings by recognizing some of the obstacles that we create for ourselves. When you're practicing with other people like that, you don't always necessarily like them. I remember my friend and I that had been in the monastery together in Japan. He's an American, and we were talking about how we didn't necessarily like all those people that we were practicing with, but there was a deep connection that grew, that we felt, just because we met in the Zenda, we met at work, we met at Dharma talks, at Dharma studies. We were all moving together as a community. And when a conflict would come up, you know, you would have to look at it if you wanted to be able to function in that community. And so it's a great opportunity to, you know, sesshin is an opportunity to do that. We bump into each other in the kitchen, or we bump into each other, you know, during work period, and then we go back to the cushion and say, what just happened there? Or it comes up in some way. So Sangha building is just such a huge thing. And I'm thinking, yeah, I don't think that we should just be working on it for a year. I think we need maybe a few more lifetimes, but at least, I think we need to put it very much on our radar and ask ourselves that question. And what is my relationship to the Sangha? And how can I bring some harmony and some insight and some inspiration through just making my own effort? I think that's probably the thing that, and Jodo, you probably would agree with me on this, but I think that's the thing about Katagiri Roshi that was the most inspiring for us, was how he embodied his teaching, because he was constantly making an effort to do the practice. And you could feel the strength of his effort. I could. And it was a great inspiration. Even when he was lying on his deathbed at Zen Center, people were coming in large groups to sit, and it was full. And after he died, that started to wane. So that's interesting that he had that much power just through his practice. And I don't think he felt that he did, but. So I'm going to stop there, I think. Oh yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention though is I'm just going to read you a few quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh's book on Joyfully Together. Any group of people can practice as a Sangha, as a community that is determined to live in harmony and awareness. All we have to do is commit ourselves to going together in the direction of peace, joy, and freedom. Together, we benefit from each other's strengths and learn from each other's weaknesses. A family is a Sangha. The members of a monastic and lay practice center are a Sangha. Even the United Nations is a Sangha. A Sangha is a family, a spiritual family connected by the practices of mindfulness, concentration, and insight. The Sangha may be Buddhist or even non-Buddhist, so long as it is a community that walks the path of liberation together. To fulfill this goal, we need concrete practices. We need the collective insight and wisdom to guide and support us. Together, we can seek liberation from fear, suffering, misunderstanding, and confusion. Please be courageous in your efforts to apply these. Extra standing. I think this idea that of courage, I was thinking about how it really takes some courage to practice this way, which brings up all of the things that we've suppressed for a good reason, things that we're afraid of. It brings up all of our fears. And it takes a lot of courage to keep coming back, and so there's always resistance that keeps coming up. And it also requires trust. And some of that trust, at first, that trust is just that there's something about this that works. And maybe it comes from a very small, tiny seed of experience. But then after a while, the trust comes from however much experience we've had sitting on the cushion and experiencing that awakening that keeps allowing us to recognize that these fears that come up and these unpleasant experiences that we have when we're sitting on the cushion are helping us to see something that is an obstacle in our lives, even if we don't recognize it. Because if we recognize it, then we can begin to release ourselves from that habitual way of thinking and being. Okay, so there, I'll stop there. Does anybody have anything they want to say? We've got just a few minutes.
Thank you, Tejo. I just wanted to say thank you very much for your teaching this morning. And as you were speaking, two things really resonated with me that I just wanted to mention. Early on, you were saying about Sangha that we are all each other's teachers just by showing up. That resonated with me. And also, as you were talking about how we relate to each other in Sangha, you said it's important to recognize how we judge others and ourselves. And these two things came up for me in the last week. I'm also part of a group that meets in Greenville for meditation, and we do a book study. On Friday, we were meditating and then had discussion afterwards, and there was this really fantastic discussion going on. And I kind of brought the topic up, but then I noticed myself kind of retreat from the discussion as it was going on, and I felt the longer that went on, the more I felt somehow I was failing. Like I felt like I should say something or I should contribute in some way, and then I had kind of this realization that, whoa, that's really false. It's okay to be here among these people who I really deeply admire and respect for their commitment to practice. And it's okay for me just to listen. And I'm just being a part of that group, like I am with this group today, was enough. That I felt that they were supporting me by being there. And I felt that even though I wasn't saying anything at the moment, I was really helping to support them too. And then this hit me that I had a really deep gratitude, just a sudden awareness of gratitude that I was friends with all of these people and that we were there together. We were on Zoom, but we were all there together, just like we're here together this morning. I have the same kind of gratitude this morning for this opportunity to be here with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the Quakers are onto something.
Well, I'll say I really appreciate too, and what Hugo Brian just pointed out, because sometimes when you talk to people about Buddhism or even Quakerism, it's like, oh, you're just staring at your own navel. But in fact, the whole point is that there is a community you're responsible to and interacting with, and makes you aware of your interconnection and the community beyond the Sangha. So I think that's really important, and it's important for me to remember, because I can just sort of say, oh, I'll just go off on my own, I can do this. But it isn't about being on our own. It is about being responsible and engaged with other people, with the good times and the rough times, and having those moments of gratitude when we see the power of a group that helps us be connected further and further out to the rocks and the trees.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was thinking this morning about how much we do, I mentioned this at the beginning, how much we do learn from each other in our families, and how we all learn to adapt, like as a pack of dogs or something, like a pack. But some of the things we learn are very good, and some of the things we learn become habitual and aren't so helpful. And how in a Sangha, the intention is to be helpful, to help each other in ways that we can all recognize, be free of some of these things that we do habitually, and things that we maybe learned in our families. But it just, what struck me was how just living in a community like that, how just being with other people, how much we learn and adapt and fit in, and how we can take that up a notch, by using the Sangha as a family, and just kind of bumping up against each other and just being with each other. Like Yuge and Jan were saying, just being with other people is enough, like the Quakers. And are there any other thoughts before we go? I guess it's 11 o'clock now, but anybody want to say anything? We can go a little over.
As always, thank you so much.
Thank you for showing up. Thank you all for showing up. So let's give back the merit. Who wants to do the response? Okay, Genjo. May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
So we'll have a 10-minute break now and then return for the last period of sitting this morning for the sesshin until 11:50. So anyone is welcome to join us if you'd like to. This is a weekend sesshin. It ends like at noon on Monday. And you can join us for this next sitting period if you'd like, or any of it.